Top 20 Scheduling Coordinator Interview Questions and Answers. Scheduling coordinators manage the agenda and calendars of key personnel in a company. They are in charge of appointments, booking of venues, and making travel arrangements. These 20 questions will help you prepare for an interview that fits this job description. 1. Why are you interested in this role? This is a simple question. Tell the interviewer the motive behind your application. Tip number 1. Ensure that your reason is beneficial to the job. Tip number 2. Your answer should be realistic. Sample answer. I have always wanted to work with your company ever since the start of my career. After going through the job description and seeing that I meet all requirements, I decided to seize this chance. I am passionate about scheduling coordination, and I believe that I can do an excellent job for your company. 2. What are the roles of a scheduling coordinator? Do you know what is expected of you in the office setting? This question should be easy to answer if you went through the job description. Tip number 1. Talk about the roles that are specific to the company. Tip number 2. Ensure that you go through the job description. Sample answer. A scheduling coordinator works in several corporate settings and manages calendars and agendas of key employees. She is in charge of appointments, booking venues for scheduled meetings, and making travel arrangements. 3. What are the qualities that a scheduling coordinator should have? The goal of this question is to establish if you have what it takes to be a scheduling coordinator. Tip number 1. Talk about job-specific qualities. Tip number 2. Mention several qualities while being as brief as possible. Sample answer. A scheduling coordinator should be able to coordinate meetings with venue availability. She should have an advanced ability to keep stakeholders informed of schedule changes and take questions. Excellent organization, interpersonal, and communication skills are also inherent to this role. 4. What major challenge did you face in your previous role, and how did you manage it? This question is trying to establish whether you are a problem solver. Remember, companies want people who can find the best solutions for problems. Tip number 1. Talk about a challenge that wasn't caused by you. Tip number 2. Remember to talk about the solution. Sample answer. During my last role, I had to keep up with last-minute changes. The stakeholders kept on making last-minute decisions which had to be acted upon. I decided to make my arrangements early and give a few extra days to deal with any modification to the schedule. 5. Describe your daily routine as a scheduling coordinator. This is a simple question which seeks to assess whether you know what you will be doing day in, day out. Tip number 1. You can give a chronological order or touch on the essentials. Tip number 2. Make sure that your routine is job-specific. Sample answer. My daily routine revolves around managing work time and schedules for organizations of the workplace. I go through my records to see any scheduled meeting and confirm if everything is still moving swiftly. I check the phone for any messages that may have been left overnight. I also answer emails that do not need much time and make appointments as the day progresses. 6. Briefly describe your experience as a scheduling coordinator. This question can be quite intimidating if you are fresh from college. The interviewer wants to know some of the places you have worked with, or some of the things you have done to impact your profession positively. Tip number 1. Talk about your former workplaces. Tip number 2. Do not give an entire history. Try to be as brief as possible. Sample answer. I first interned at Bradbury Inc., where I worked in the office of the scheduling coordinator. I got absorbed by the company after 1 year when the scheduling coordinator left. I worked with the company for 5 years before leaving for Brown Berets, where I have been for the last 5 years. 7. What kind of strategies and mindset is needed for this role? The question is trying to establish if you have the right strategies and mindset for the job at hand. Tip number 1. Talk about a job-specific mindset. Tip number 2. The strategy should be one that has worked for you. Sample answer. This role requires somebody who appreciates teamwork. Coordination is all about working with different personalities from different departments. The person should also have a result-oriented mindset to avoid simple mistakes that may be costly. 8. What is the biggest challenge that you foresee in this job? The interviewer is trying to establish whether you have researched and identified some of the areas that may be challenging as you go about your daily routine in the specific company. Tip number 1. Be honest and truthful. Tip number 2. The challenge should be job specific. Sample answer. I have established that the finance department of your firm can only release funds after 48 hours. This can be quite challenging, especially if there are last-minute changes to schedules that need immediate funding. However, this can always be communicated and worked around. 9. How do you stay motivated at work? Not everybody finds it amusing to report to work day in, day out. The interviewer must know what keeps you coming to the office and giving your all. Tip number 1. Your reason should be non-monetary. Tip number 2. Your source of motivation should come from within. Sample answer. My love for results keeps me going. I believe in excellent performance and giving my all. I do not stop at anything until I have achieved what I set out to. 10. Describe a time when you failed and the lesson that you learned from it. The interviewer wants to establish if you can take responsibility. Accepting that you failed in a role is taking responsibility. Tip number 1. Do not attempt to shift the blame. Tip number 2. Be honest and remember to talk about the lesson learned. Sample answer. I once arranged a meeting venue, which was later rendered unavailable due to natural factors. The venue coordinators failed to communicate. Given that this was a place that we had held meetings from time immemorial, I didn't see the need to confirm whether the venue was available or not. The meeting did not take place and had to be rescheduled, a move that did not make my bosses happy. I learned to always reconfirm a venue a day before the scheduled date. 11. Tell me about yourself. This is one of the most frequently asked questions in any job interview. It often serves as an icebreaker, giving you a chance to talk openly and honestly. Tip number 1. The answer should not sound memorized. Tip number 2. You do not have to tell the interviewer everything that you have done. Sample answer. My name is James White. I live in North Carolina, and I am in. You can then list your hobbies, talk about your work history, outside interest and education. 12. Do you love working alone or with a team? The interviewer wants to know if you are a team worker. Remember, as a coordinator, you will not be working alone, and therefore, being a team worker can disqualify you. Tip number 1. Your answer should be a resounding yes. Tip number 2. Convince the interviewer that you can set relationships with team members. Sample answer. I love teamwork mostly because I have a range of interpersonal skills that I have learned over time. I love interacting with others and believe that doing work as a team mitigates chances of mistakes. 13. What have you done to contribute to your personal development in the last 1 year, given that this is a changing field? The interviewer simply wants to know whether you are motivated and goal-oriented. Tip number 1. This is a chance to showcase things that you have either done personally or professionally for yourself. Tip number 2. Always think about this question in advance. You can list hobbies or non-work related activities. Sample answer. I joined a book club at the start of the year and also increased my involvement in my local food bank. From these two, I have learned a lot of things about teamwork, community and taking initiative, qualities that have greatly impacted my career. 14. How did you find out about our company and what do you know about us? The interviewer is giving you a chance to demonstrate initiative, which can set you ahead of other applicants. She also wants to know whether you did your research beforehand. Tip number 1. This answer does not expect an in-depth history of the company. Tip number 2. You can talk about the core values, principal employees and how the company has been faring on the news lately. Sample answer. I found out about your company from your Facebook page. I later took time to research about you and found out that one of your core values is leadership and customer satisfaction. I also learned that employees are treated well based on online reviews. 15. What are your strengths? The interviewer wants to know whether some of your strengths can benefit him, her. Tip number 1. Talk of strengths that will benefit the employer. Tip number 2. You should list strengths that are relative to the position. Sample answer. I am a problem solver, motivator, a natural leader and I can perform under pressure. I also have a positive attitude towards work and loyal to the course. 16. Do you have weaknesses? Everybody in this life has weaknesses. Therefore, before you think of denying or failing to answer this question, Know that the interviewer expects you to. The interviewer wants to know how you view and evaluate yourself. Tip number 1. Do not outline a weakness that may make you lose the chance. Tip number 2. Do not raise any red flags. Respond realistically and mention a small, work-related weakness. Sample answer. I get too engrossed in my work that I often fail to observe what is happening around me. However, I always try to take breaks and stretch out before resumption. 17. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? The interviewer is assessing your job commitment. She wants to know if you are visionary and reliable. Therefore, be careful when tackling this question. Tip number 1. Your response should show progression in your career. Tip number 2. Align your response to the company's needs and future. Sample answer. I am hoping to be done with my doctorate, which will come in handy in my career. I also want to be the top employer by then with several achievements both in the office and in my personal life. 18. Why should we hire you? Why do you feel that you are the best candidate out of a ton of applicants? This question gives you a chance to stand out of the rest. Tip number 1. Do not slam your fellow interviewees. Tip number 2. Focus on your strengths and do not assume the skills of other applicants. Sample answer. I am a loyal employee with vast experience. I have worked for 7 leading companies all through my career, and I believe that I can positively impact your firm from some of the things that I have learned over time. 19. Why are you quitting your last job? This is often an innocent question that can be a deal breaker if not handled properly. Therefore, think through this and do not throw yourself under the bus. Tip number 1. Not being paid well should not be a reason. Tip number 2. Be honest, brief and remain positive. Sample answer. I quit my last job because I wanted to progress in my career. I felt like I had been doing the same thing over and over for several years without any personal and career advancement. I want to develop both personally and career-wise. 20. How would you deal with an employee who does not meet deadlines? The interviewer is assessing your leadership skills. Remember, as a scheduling coordinator, you will have some subordinates in your place of work. Tip number 1. Show some empathy. Tip number 2. Do not show the interviewer that you are bossy and disconnected from other employees' plights. Sample answer. I will have a sit down with the employee and find out why she finds it hard to meet deadlines. Inasmuch as employees are expected to deliver, certain factors are beyond their control. If she cannot improve, I will request that the company transfers him to a lighter department. Conclusion. A scheduling coordinator plays a vital role in any office setting. Therefore, you need to adequately prepare if you have a scheduled interview. These top 20 scheduling and coordination interview questions and answers should be a good starting point.